I left my husband and sister. I thought I was being exaggerated, that my sister, sweet, shy, incapable of lying, would never cross a line like that, and that my husband, the man who said I was the love of his life, would never look at another woman, especially not at her. Scene 1. I still feel ashamed to tell this story. It's not that shame that passes with time or that you can disguise with a joke. It's the shame that sticks to your skin, that comes back every time you pass someone on the street and think, does this person know? Do they also think I was stupid? Because I was. I was the person who put the wolf to sleep next to the sheep and still left the door open. I was the wife who believed every I love you whispered in the kitchen, every promise made in bed, every look that seemed too sincere to be a lie. And I was the sister who opened the house, offered the couch, made coffee and said, stay as long as you need, you're not alone. But she was. She always was. And so was I. My name doesn't matter here. It could be anyone's. What matters is that I was married to Daniel, the man who said every single day that I was the love of his life. I believed with an almost childlike faith, the kind you learn watching romance movies, where the couple fights, but in the end it always works out. I also had a younger sister, Larissa, shy, soft voice, that person you would put your hand in the fire for without thinking twice. If someone, at that time, dared to suggest she could betray me, I would have cut relations immediately. Well, today I know that sometimes danger doesn't come disguised as a villain. It comes with a clean face, smiling, with the same last name as yours. Scene 2. In the beginning, my life seemed like one of those margarine commercials, a little tired, but happy. Daniel and I had a small apartment, but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a window facing the street, an American kitchen where we spent more time talking than actually cooking. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And I thought that was enough. He woke up before me almost every day, made coffee and left the mug on my table with a note or a poorly drawn heart. Sometimes it was just an I love you, other times something longer, like thank you for being here, you're my safe place. I kept some of those notes in an old shoebox, as if they were documented proof that this was real. I looked at that scene and thought, I made it. Everything is fine. I finally have a normal adult life. We weren't rich, didn't travel to Miami every year, but we went out to dinner at least once a month, watched series with our legs together on the couch, made plans for a future with children and maybe a bigger house in the suburbs, American movie style, with a white fence and a dog in the yard. Daniel had that way about him of a responsible, centered man that everyone praised. My mother, who was never one to praise anyone, looked at him and said, you got lucky, you know. This one is the kind that stays. And I believed it. There was a song we always listened to together, one of those that played on the radio all the time, kind of cheesy. But that became ours. He would play it in the car when we went to the market, sing softly just to make me laugh, and I pretended I thought it was ridiculous, but secretly loved it. It was as if that song were the thread that sewed our routine. I remember one specific time, a few months before Larissa appeared. We were lying on the couch, the afternoon sun hitting the living room, and he ran his hand through my hair in that distracted way, as if he didn't even realize he was doing it. You know I'm never going to leave you, right? He said, without taking his eyes off the TV. I turned to him, half not believing someone said these things outside of movies. Really? I asked, testing. He smiled, looked at me sideways, and replied, really, you're like my oxygen. Without you, I don't breathe right. At the time, I thought it was cute, almost too sappy. Today, when that memory comes back, I feel a pang in my chest, because that phrase became such a big lie that I almost choke just remembering it. But on that day, I believed. I believed with an almost naive faith, the kind we learn watching romantic comedy, where the couple fights, but in the end it always works out. I had no idea that the real test hadn't even begun yet. People looked at us and said, you match so well. And I would smile, proud, as if I had passed a difficult test, as if I had finally done something right in my life. I didn't know that right underneath that cover of normality, there were cracks I refused to see. There was one time we were at the supermarket, pushing the cart together, discussing whether to buy the cheaper brand of coffee or the one he liked. He put his hand on my waist, pulled me to his side, and said, laughing, "Okay, we'll buy yours, but only because you're too beautiful to fight with." I laughed, gave him a light slap on the arm, and we kept walking. But, for a second, when he looked at the shelf and not at me, I saw something on his face. It wasn't sadness or anger, it was tiredness. A tiredness I pretended not to have seen. Today I know that tiredness wasn't from work. It was from me. Or rather, it was from the version of me he thought wasn't enough. But on that day, I simply ignored it. Because it was easier to believe everything was fine than to face the possibility that, maybe, he was already looking for an exit before I even realized there was an open door. Scene 3. Larissa entered my story in a way that, at the time, I called a difficult phase. She had ended a long relationship with Raphael, that guy she swore was the love of her life until she discovered he still had contact with his ex. When she called me, crying, saying she had nowhere else to go, I didn't think twice. "Come here," I said. "Stay as long as you need. We'll figure it out." She arrived on a Thursday afternoon with 2 large suitcases, a backpack hanging on her back, and the look of someone who had just lost a war. Her hair was tied up any which way. She wore an old sweatshirt I recognized as mine, borrowed years ago and never returned. When I opened the door, she hugged me so tight I almost lost my balance. "I'm sorry," she whispered in my ear. "Sorry for showing up like this. I just didn't know where to go." I pulled her away a little, held her face with both hands, and wiped the tears with my thumb. "Stop that. You're my sister. You'll always have a place here." She nodded, but kept crying, in that silent way that was worse than any scream. Daniel appeared in the living room seconds later, coming from the bedroom, still in work clothes. He looked at Larissa with that expression of, "Wow, she's really bad," and immediately went into helper mode. "Let me take the suitcases to the guest room," he said, grabbing both at once, as if wanting to show he was there for whatever was needed. I looked at him, grateful, and thought, this is why I married this man. Today, when that memory comes back, I think, this is why I should have been suspicious from the beginning. That first night with her at home, we tried to create a light atmosphere, as if we could make her pain disappear just with goodwill. I made a simple pasta, the one I knew how to make with my eyes closed. Daniel opened a bottle of cheap wine that had been forgotten in the pantry, and suddenly the kitchen seemed like a series scene, 3 adults trying to laugh on top of their own emotional mess. Larissa sat on the edge of the chair, still a bit wary, as if she wasn't sure she deserved to be there. She picked up the wine glass, took a small sip, and forced a smile. "Thanks so much, guys. I swear I won't get in the way. As soon as I get organized, I'll leave." I shook my head. "You're not getting in the way at all. Relax." Daniel, who was leaning against the counter, raised his glass and said, "That's right. The house is yours too. We'll figure it out. We always have." I looked at him, smiling, finding that gesture of generosity beautiful. Larissa also looked, but the way she looked was different. It was a longer look, a second more than normal, as if she were registering something. At the time, I didn't notice. Today, when I relive that scene in my head, I can see clearly. That's where it started. After dinner, we stayed talking in the living room. I told old stories, the ones Larissa loved to hear when she was younger, about the time we ran away from home to camp in the neighbor's yard and ended up coming back because I was terrified of a rat. The 3 of us laughed together, and for a moment I felt that good feeling of belonging, that finally my family was together, safe, protected. I remember looking at the 2 of them, sitting on the couch, her with her legs curled up, him with his arm resting on the back, and thinking, look at that, I managed to create this. A safe place for us. If someone had paused that scene and warned me what was coming next, I would have knocked that plate on the floor, sent everyone away, and locked the door with a padlock. But no one warns you. In the following days, Larissa began to settle in. She left her shampoo in the bathroom, hung some clothes in the closet, put a childhood photo of us on the bedside table in the guest room. She was trying to rebuild her life, and I was happy to be able to help. Daniel also seemed happy. He joked with her at breakfast, asked if she had slept well, offered rides when she needed to go out. I thought it was beautiful to see the two getting along so well. "Your sister is cool," he said once, while washing dishes. "It's good having her here. Makes the house more alive." I smiled, drying a plate. "Yeah, right. She's always been quiet, but I think being here will be good for her." He agreed, but didn't look at me. He just kept scrubbing the glass, harder than necessary. I should have noticed, but I chose not to see. There was a specific night, a few days after her arrival, when I woke up in the early morning thirsty. I went to the kitchen, barefoot, trying not to make noise, and when I passed by the living room, I saw the lamplight still on. Larissa was sitting on the couch, messing with her phone, with red eyes. She didn't see me. I stood in the shadow for a few seconds, just watching. She typed something, deleted it, typed again, as if she were fighting an internal war. I thought about asking if everything was okay, but ended up going back to the bedroom. Today I asked myself, who was she sending messages to that day? To Raphael? To Daniel? Or to someone I didn't even know existed? The answer came months later, but that night I simply pretended I hadn't seen anything. Because it was more comfortable to believe my sister was just suffering from love than to imagine that, right under my nose, she was starting to build another story, one that would destroy me completely. Scene 4. The first signs didn't come like a slap in the face. They came like a light discomfort, like a stone in your shoe. Larissa and Daniel began to get along too well in the kitchen. I would arrive from work and often find them there, side by side, her cutting vegetables, him stirring something in the pot, both laughing at a joke I hadn't heard. When I entered, the subject would change suddenly, and someone would say, "Oh, it was nothing." One night, I arrived a little earlier than normal. The door was ajar. I opened it slowly and heard her laughter first. It was a loose white light laugh, like I hadn't seen in a while. I stood there for a few seconds, just listening. I heard his voice, low, saying something I didn't understand, and then the two exploded in a complicit little laugh. I entered the kitchen with a, "Hi, I'm home," and the two almost got scared. She pulled her hair from her face, kind of awkward. He cleaned his hand on the dish towel, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "We were talking about a story from school. Relax," he said. I smiled, but inside something clicked. That night, when I went to sleep, her perfume was still strong in the living room, mixed with his deodorant, and that stuck in my head. I tried to convince myself I was exaggerating. After all, it was my sister, my younger sister, whom I had taken care of all my life. And Daniel? He was my husband, the man who swore in front of witnesses that he would love me until death. But that perfume wouldn't leave my memory. Scene 5. Before everything got worse, I went through a complicated health period. That's when their excuse was born, and that's what disgusts me to this day. It wasn't anything serious in the sense of life or death, but it was debilitating enough to leave me stuck inside the house for weeks. I started having strong crises, pains that came out of nowhere, a fatigue that seemed to suck every gram of energy I had. I needed to take time off from work, more at home, more fragile than I like to admit. And for someone who always prided herself on being the strong one in the story, the one who solves things, the one who takes care, becoming this version of myself, dependent, tired, vulnerable, was humiliating. Daniel would say it was hard on him. Not in an aggressive way, but with that tired, somewhat resentful tone that made me feel guilty for being sick. "I'm handling everything here, love, but it's heavy, work, house, you." He said, "you," as if I were one more task on his list. I tried to thank him, say it would pass soon, that he was amazing for being there. But deep down, a part of me began to feel like a burden, as if my fragile existence were getting in the way of his life. Larissa came frequently during that time, even before moving in for good. She helped with the house, with shopping, made me tea. I heard the two of them in the hallway, talking softly while I was lying down, and I thought, how good that they get along. I'm not alone. Today, when I think about it, I want to scream. Because while I thought they were taking care of me, they were actually starting to take care of each other. And I, locked in the bedroom, too weak to get out of bed, was becoming invisible inside my own house. Once, I remember waking up from an afternoon nap. The sunlight came through the blinds, forming stripes on the floor, and I heard their voices in the living room. Low laughter. That type of laugh you give when you don't want to wake someone, but that at the same time carries a strange intimacy. My vision was a bit blurred from the medications, but I dragged myself to the door and opened it just a little bit, enough to see. They were on the couch, side by side, watching something on TV. She with her feet curled up, he with his arm resting on the back, body curved in her direction. They weren't touching, but there was a space too small between them, a closeness that seemed more comfortable than it should be. That day, all I thought was, they're almost like siblings now. How good that he's not alone while I'm in this state. Today, when that memory comes back, it feels like someone rubbing salt on top of an open cut. I turned their closeness into proof of love, when in reality it was the beginning of the end. There was a specific night that got engraved in my memory, as if my body knew that was important, even though my head still refused to understand. I was lying down, almost sleeping, but not completely. I was in that kind of groggy state, where you hear everything, but can't react. The bedroom door was ajar, and the hallway light came in faint, illuminating only part of the room. That's when I heard his voice, low, but clear enough to reach me. She needs rest, I know, but I also need attention, you know? Sometimes I feel alone here. I froze. My heart raced, but my body remained immobile, as if stuck between sleep and wakefulness. I didn't hear Larissa's response immediately, but I heard the silence. And silence, sometimes, says more than any word. After a few seconds, she responded, with a low voice, almost whispered, "I understand. It must be really difficult." And then I heard the sound of someone moving on the couch, the upholstery creaking slightly, as if someone had gotten closer. There were no more words after that, just the sound of the TV in the background and the heavy silence that seemed to fill every corner of the house. I should have gotten up, should have gone there, turned on the light, asked what was happening, but I did nothing. Why? Because I was afraid to confirm what my body already knew. Because it was easier to pretend I hadn't heard, that I hadn't understood, that it didn't mean anything. In the following days, I started paying more attention. Not in a conscious way, but as if my instinct had turned on a permanent alert. I noticed small things. Larissa started using a different perfume, sweeter, stronger. Daniel took longer in the shower. The two laughed together at jokes I didn't understand. And, whenever I entered a room where they were, the mood changed. As if I were an intruder in my own house. One morning, I was lying in bed, listening to the sound of them making coffee in the kitchen. I should have been happy. Should have been grateful to have people taking care of me. But, instead, I felt a strange weight in my chest, as if something were being taken from me without me being able to stop it. I picked up my phone, went into the messages between Daniel and me. I reread the last conversations. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Rest? Love? Everything seemed normal, but something was missing. He didn't send those silly messages he used to send anymore. He didn't say, "I love you," for no reason anymore. He didn't ask me anymore about my day, about how I was really feeling. It was as if he had put an emotional distance between us, and I, too, weak to fight, just accepted it. There was a day when I finally managed to get out of bed, shower, and get dressed. I was feeling a little better, almost human again. I left the room excited, wanting to surprise them both, maybe make dinner together, go back to being part of the house's dynamics. When I got to the living room, they were sitting very close to each other. Larissa messing with Daniel's phone, both laughing at something on the screen. When they saw me, they both moved away too quickly. Hi, she said, with a forced smile. You're better. Yeah, I replied, trying to smile too. I thought it was time to get out of that room. Daniel got up, came to me and gave me a quick kiss on the forehead. That's good, love. We miss you out here. But the kiss was mechanical, without warmth, as if it were an automatic, obligatory gesture. That night, lying next to him in bed, I wanted to ask. I wanted to turn to him and say, "Is something wrong? You're different." But I didn't ask. because deep down, I was afraid of the answer. Afraid he would confirm what I already felt. That while I was sick, he had found in another person what he thought was missing in me. And the worst part? That other person was sleeping in the room next door. Scene 6. Over time, the illness passed, at least the one in my body. I went back to work, tried to resume my routine, and that's when things started to get strange in a way that I couldn't even pretend I didn't see anymore. Daniel always seemed to have his phone face down. He, who used to leave his phone anywhere, started walking around with the device glued to his hand, even inside the house. When a message arrived and I was nearby, he would change the subject, move to another app, as if hiding a silly secret. Larissa, on the other hand, was quieter, more in her room, but suddenly started laughing alone looking at her phone. I tried not to connect the dots. You know when you have all the puzzle pieces, but refuse to assemble them because you know you won't like the final image. That was it. There was a day when I entered the living room and saw Larissa's coat thrown on the couch. It was the exact place where Daniel always sat to watch TV. There was a dent in the cushions, as if someone had just gotten up from there. I picked up the coat, brought it to my nose, and smelled her perfume impregnated in the fabric, mixed with something I knew too well. His deodorant. I got a quick dizziness, but instead of facing it, I folded the coat, put it aside, and told myself, "You're exaggerating. They would never do this." It was more comfortable to call myself paranoid than to think about the possibility of being betrayed inside my own house. Scene 7. There's something I never told anyone. I already had a camera system at home, well before Larissa moved there. At the time, the excuse was fear of burglary, because the condo had gone through some strange cases. People were saying someone was testing doors, entering empty apartments, taking small things no one noticed immediately. I got scared. Not that irrational fear, but the kind that makes you sleep with one eye open. Daniel even helped install everything. He messed with the app with me, tested the angles, laughed when I got nervous because I couldn't get the Wi-Fi to connect. "Relax, love, we'll figure it out," he said, fixing the router as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The cameras mainly captured the living room and the entrance, nothing in the bathroom or bedroom. It was just an extra feeling of security. I remember being relieved when I finally saw the image of the living room appear on my phone, a bit grainy but functional. "There, now we're protected," I said, and he smiled, ran his hand on my shoulder, and agreed. Over time, I almost forgot they existed. The app stayed there, lost among other notifications, and I only opened it once in a while, more out of curiosity than necessity. It was like having insurance you never imagined needing to use. Until the day I needed to travel for work for 2 days. When my boss mentioned the trip, the first person I thought of was Larissa. She was still a bit lost, living with us, trying to get back on her feet after the breakup. I thought, at least she won't be alone. Daniel is here. What an irony. The night before going, I was alone at home. Daniel had gone out to take care of something at the bank. Larissa was in her room, and I sat there, at the kitchen table, looking at my phone for no specific reason. That's when I decided to open the camera app. It had been a while since I had gone in there, and when I saw the old image of the living room, still, silent, I had an impulse that today I recognize as despair disguised as care. I adjusted the angle of one of the cameras to better capture the couch. I don't really know why. At the time, I convinced myself it was just to have a better view of the living room, in case something happened while I was away. But, deep down, I think I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. At that moment, I didn't think I'm going to catch them both. I thought something much more innocent, almost pathetic. If something happens, anything, I'll know. I was trying to convince myself that nothing would happen. I went to travel with this idiotic mixture of trust and fear, as if I were carrying 2 heavy backpacks, one on each shoulder. I sent a message to Daniel before getting in the Uber. "Take care of Larissa, okay? She's still fragile." He responded with a heart emoji and a, "You got it, love." I also talked to Larissa through the building intercom before going down. "Eat well, sleep well, call me if anything." She smiled, waved through the window, and I left thinking I was doing the right thing. I said goodbye to both of them as someone who entrusts the house and the heart to the right guardians. Today, when I think about that goodbye, I feel a tightness in my chest so strong I can barely breathe. because I literally handed everything over on a silver platter. I gave the keys, gave the space, gave the trust, and they used every second of my absence to destroy everything I had built. But on that day, I still believed. I believed Daniel was my safe harbor. I believed Larissa would never do something like that to me. I believed I was protected, not by cameras, but by love. What an illusion. Scene 8. The trip was quick, but it felt like something was pulling me back home the whole time. I slept poorly at the hotel, in that way where you wake up every 2 hours, for no apparent reason, with your heart racing and a strange feeling that you forgot something important. On the first night, I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay there looking at the ceiling, trying to understand why my body was on maximum alert. I picked up my phone, thought about calling Daniel, but gave up. He must be sleeping, I thought. I'm not going to wake anyone because of silly insomnia. But my body knew, before me, that something was wrong. On the second day, during the work meeting, I could barely pay attention. My boss talked about numbers, goals, projections, and I just thought about going back. There was a growing anxiety, like when you feel you left the stove onwards but multiplied by 1,000. When I finally got an Uber back home, late in the afternoon of the second day, I was exhausted, but relieved. I thought, there, it's over. Now I go back and see I was worried for nothing. When the car stopped in front of the building, 2 things caught my attention right away. First, the apartment door wasn't locked as usual. It was just ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to turn the key. I pushed slowly, and the door opened without resistance. Second, the silence. It wasn't that common silence of an empty house, like when you arrive and know you're alone. It was a heavy silence, kind of guilty, as if the walls were holding their breath, as if the house itself knew something I didn't know yet. I entered calling, Daniel, Larissa. Nothing. No immediate response. Just the sound of my steps on the floor, echoing louder than it should. His coat was thrown on the couch. Not hung on the entrance coat rack, as he always did. Thrown, wrinkled, as if it had been taken off in a hurry. And her perfume was in the air, strong, sweet, as if she had passed through there just a few minutes before. It wasn't that light smell of someone who lives in the house. It was the smell of someone who just left a place, in that way that sticks to the environment for a few minutes before disappearing. I stopped in the middle of the living room, holding the suitcase in my hand, and simply breathed. I tried to identify what was wrong, besides the obvious. That's when I saw it. The couch cushions were out of place. I always left everything aligned, kind of neurotic, and now they were thrown any which way. One fallen on the floor, another turned the wrong way. I felt my stomach knot. I knocked on the door of the guest room, where Larissa stayed. I knocked lightly, but with urgency. Larissa, are you there? Her voice came muffled, choked. Coming, just a minute. But she didn't come out. I stood there, in front of the closed door, hearing the sound of drawers being closed, quick steps, as if she were hiding something. I left the suitcase in the hallway and went looking for Daniel. I found him in the kitchen, messing with something meaningless, like someone who opens and closes cabinets just to have something to do. He didn't even look at me right away. Hi, love, I said, trying to sound normal. How were the days? He turned, kind of startled, as if he hadn't heard me arrive. Oh, hi, you arrived early. I didn't arrive early, I replied, frowning. I arrived at the time I said. He ran his hand through his hair, nervous, and let out a strange laugh. Yeah, sorry, I lost track of time. I asked again, slowly, as if I were testing. How were the days? He responded as if he had memorized a text. Quiet, normal, nothing much. Larissa stayed mostly in her room. I worked a lot. We had dinner together once. That's it. He didn't look at me. I felt a strange anger rising, but I swallowed it. It was as if I were in a series episode where everyone knew the secret except me. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine, but repeating to myself, like a mantra, as soon as I'm alone, I'm going to watch the cameras. At night, the 3 of us had dinner together. It was one of the strangest meals of my life. Larissa barely spoke. moved the food with her fork, her eyes red, as if she had been crying. Daniel forced conversation, asked about the trip, but I saw he was tense, jaw tight, the way he held the glass too hard. No one looked each other in the eyes. After dinner, Larissa locked herself in her room. Daniel said he was tired, showered, and lay down. I stayed in the living room, alone, with my phone in my hand and my heart beating so fast it felt like I was going to hear it through the speaker. I could have deleted everything without looking, could have destroyed the recordings, formatted the system, pretended that app never existed, could have chosen ignorance, the one they say is a blessing, but I didn't choose that. I chose the truth. And the truth, when it finally appeared on my phone screen, destroyed me in a way I never imagined possible. Scene 9, Conflict 1, Discovery. That night, when the house finally slept, I turned on only the hallway light, sat on the edge of the bed, and picked up my phone. I opened the camera app with my heart beating so fast it felt like I was going to hear it through the speaker. I could have deleted everything without looking, destroyed the recordings, pretended nothing had happened, but I pressed play. I started with the first day of the trip. The image was a bit grainy, but you could see enough. I saw Daniel arriving from work, throwing the key on the table, taking off his shoe. Then I saw Larissa come out of the room, go to the kitchen, talk to him. For a while, it looked like just that, two people sharing a house. Until, at one point, I saw the two sitting on the couch, first with a respectful distance, a safety space between them. Then, that space began to disappear. She rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. On the contrary, he adjusted his body to get closer. I squeezed the phone so hard my hand started to hurt. I wanted to scream at the screen, as if I could enter that video and tear them both out of there. But I could only watch. In a few minutes, what was closeness became affection. She ran her hand on his arm, he held her hand, and then, finally, the two kissed. In my living room, on my couch, under the cameras I myself had installed to protect myself, I felt a taste of blood in my mouth, from how hard I was clenching my teeth. My vision got blurred, but I continued. It was like watching your own accident and, still, not being able to look away. I fast-forwarded the video. I didn't need to see everything. I had already understood. That's when came the phrase that changed everything for good. They were hugging on the couch, after everything, and Daniel said, with a low voice, but clear enough for the microphone to capture, "She can't know the baby is mine." I almost dropped the phone. Baby. Right then, I froze. Baby. My sister was pregnant, and I had no idea. I felt my world end in seconds. It wasn't just the physical betrayal, the kiss, the caresses. It was the idea that, while I still thought I was a wife, he was already imagining himself as the father of my sister's child. Scene 10, Conflict 2, Confrontation. The next day, there was no way to pretend anymore. I spent the whole morning walking around the house on autopilot, as if each room had become a crime scene. The couch, the kitchen, the hallway. When they were both awake, I called them to the living room. My voice came out so calm that even I was surprised. "I need to show you something," I said. I turned on the TV, connected my phone, and pressed play on the recording. No one said anything in the first few seconds. The image of the two of them appeared on the couch, like the night before I had seen. Larissa brought her hand to her mouth. Daniel remained motionless, with his eyes glued to the screen. I wasn't looking at the video. I was looking at their reaction. When the kiss appeared, she started crying. He didn't. He had the expression of someone caught in a poorly told lie, but still looking for a loophole. I let the scene continue until the baby phrase. When he said, "She can't know the baby is mine," I paused. The silence that came after was so loud it seemed like a punch to the chest. "Since when?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse. "How long have I been sharing the house with you two living this behind my back?" Daniel was the first to open his mouth. "It's not like that," he said. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. We didn't want to hurt you." I laughed. A short, nervous laugh that sounded more like choking. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you did everything inside my house." Larissa cried nonstop. "And I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. she repeated. After a few minutes, the words began to make sense. She confessed it had happened more than once. That everything started at the time I got sick. That he was feeling needy. That they were both fragile. It was the most disgusting cliché I've ever heard in my life. He said you were distant. That he missed attention, she whispered. I felt important, necessary, and when I realized, it had already happened. I looked at them both and thought, you turned my illness into the perfect excuse. That day, I collapsed inside. I didn't scream, didn't break anything, didn't make a scene. My way of falling apart was quieter. I simply stopped believing in everything I had known until then. Scene 11. The following days seemed like a blur. I kept going to work, answering messages, existing on autopilot. But inside, it was as if someone had turned off the lights. At home, the atmosphere was unbearable. Daniel tried to talk, say he loved me, that it didn't mean anything, that it was a confusion of feelings. Larissa avoided crossing paths with me, locked herself in her room, and when we bumped into each other in the hallway, she could barely face me. I felt ashamed of myself. Ashamed of being the last to notice, of putting my sister in there, of defending them both before anything. I started isolating myself too. There were days when I would sit on the bed, staring at nothing, imagining 1,000 forms of revenge. I thought about exposing them both on social media, sending the video to the whole family, printing the images and pasting them on the building door. But at the same time came the feeling of tiredness and humiliation. I would have to put myself as the betrayed woman, deceived, ridiculed. It was as if I were stuck between two pains, swallowing everything in silence and turning my suffering into a spectacle. Neither seemed exactly fair. I just wanted a pain that didn't make me feel small. Scene 12, Conflict 3, Final Choice. Over time, Larissa's belly began to show. Yes, she was pregnant. Yes, within all that mess, there was a baby. Daniel, on some level I still don't understand today, believed that child was his. Silently, he began to try to assume this role, talking about responsibility, about not abandoning an innocent child. It was almost comical to hear the man who had destroyed his own marriage using the word responsibility. I, on the other hand, didn't trust anything that came out of either of their mouths anymore. That's when, on any given day, while he was talking about how he was going to figure everything out, I interrupted with a strange calm. There's going to be a DNA test. That was the only thing I said. He looked at me, surprised, as if this possibility hadn't crossed his mind. That's not necessary. I trust her, he replied. I just laughed, without humor. You trusted a lot of wrong things so far, I said. This time, I'm going to trust a piece of paper. We organized everything almost bureaucratically. Clinic, date, signatures, collection. I went along more out of necessity to close that cycle than out of concern for the result. Inside, I already knew that, regardless of what that test said, my marriage was over. Still, I needed the complete truth, naked and raw, no matter how much it hurt. It was as if I were finishing tearing off an old bandage from an infected wound. The envelope arrived a few weeks later, small, light, but with a weight no scale could measure. I held that paper in my hands for a few seconds, feeling the sweat on my palm before opening it. Daniel was beside me, visibly tense. Larissa, sitting a bit farther away, looked at the floor. I opened the envelope slowly, as if starting the last chapter of a book I couldn't stand to read, but also couldn't put down. I read the main phrase twice, to be sure. The baby wasn't Daniel's, it was Raphael's, the ex-boyfriend she said she had forgotten. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It aligned. Everything made a crooked sense. Her emotional mess, the comings and goings with her ex, the confusion the two created together with Daniel. The betrayal between them remained huge, but now the final farce was unraveling. Daniel went white. He got up, started walking from one side to the other, as if he were looking for an exit in a room without doors. He repeated, "It's not possible, it's not possible," as if the world were being unfair to him. I looked at that scene and, For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the main character of the disaster. I was almost a spectator. There, finally, the one losing everything was him. Scene 13. He lost the marriage. He lost the image of perfect man. He tried to maintain for family, friends, co-workers. Over time, he even lost his job, because rumors run fast and, in some companies, reputation weighs heavy. Larissa, on her part, did what she always did when things got too difficult. She disappeared. She moved, cut contact with almost everyone, changed her number, city, who knows. It was as if she wanted to erase her own name from the story. And me? I was left with the pieces. But, for the first time, they were my pieces in my hands, no longer scattered in the hands of those who didn't know how to care. Today, looking back, it hurts to admit. But what hurts me most isn't just the betrayal. It's realizing that I myself put them both under the same roof, with the door wide open, believing that the love I gave was enough to hold everyone's character. I handed over the key to my house and my heart with both hands, smiling, thinking I was doing the right thing. I could spend the rest of my life feeding a desire for revenge, creating elaborate plans, wishing they both feel on their skin everything I felt. But, to be honest, what bothered me most that day wasn't imagining the perfect revenge. It was understanding how much I myself ignored the warnings, silenced my intuition, and called paranoia what was already survival. Conclusion. After everything passed, I made simple but symbolic decisions. I changed the locks on the house. I uninstalled the cameras, not because they were the problem, but because I didn't want to live watching others anymore, expecting to be betrayed again. I needed to learn to choose better who enters, instead of spending energy observing what they do when they think no one is watching. One day, I waited for late afternoon, opened all the apartment windows and let the cold air in. The house seemed different, emptier, but, curiously, lighter. I grabbed the old camera remote, looked at it for a few seconds and threw it in the trash. Then I went to the mirror with scissors in hand. I cut a large strand of hair. That part I always kept the same because Daniel said he loved it. It wasn't about beauty. It was about removing from me anything that still reminded me of the woman who accepted crumbs in the name of a love that only existed on one side. Today, if someone asks me if I still believe in love, the answer is, I do, but not like before. Before, I thought loving was opening all doors, erasing all passwords, handing over the spare key and saying, come in, stay, do what you want, I trust. Now, I understand that love is also limit. It's latch. It's knowing how to say, from here you don't pass. If you've made it this far, maybe you're wondering what this whole story has to do with you. Maybe you've never been through something so extreme. Maybe you have, but in silence. The point is, we need to stop thinking that those who hurt us always come with a villain's face. Sometimes, the worst damage is done by those we called family and love of my life. And the cruelest part is realizing that, many times, it was we ourselves who opened the door, made the coffee, arranged the couch, and said, make yourself comfortable. Today, my greatest care isn't with cameras, passwords, or locks. My greatest care is with who I let sit on my couch, laugh at my story, and call us what, in practice, is just me trying to hold up the world. Because if there's one thing I learned, in the most painful way possible, it's that blind love doesn't protect anyone. It just turns off the light. And when you finally turn it on again, you discover the enemies were sleeping in the room next door.